Ask someone what keeps a family wealthy for 200 years, and most people will guess the same three things: a good lawyer, a good accountant, and a bit of luck. They're wrong, or rather, they're answering the wrong question. Lawyers draft documents. Accountants manage numbers. But documents and numbers don't explain why one family's fortune survives 5 generations, while another family, starting with the exact same amount of money, loses it all within 20 years. Something else is doing the actual work of preservation. Something that doesn't show up on a balance sheet, isn't written into any trust, and is rarely discussed openly, even within the families who practice it most faithfully. That something is values. Not values in the vague motivational poster sense, but a specific, identifiable set of internal commitments that shape every financial decision a family makes, year after year, generation after generation, often without anyone in the family even being able to articulate them out loud. Today, we're naming them. All of them. And, by the end of this video, you'll understand wealth preservation in a way that has almost nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. Before we get into it, if you're new here, this channel goes deep into the real mechanics of old money and generational wealth every week, not just the aesthetic. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. We're about to get into some of the most important material we've ever covered. 1. Stewardship, the value that changes every other decision. If there is one value that sits underneath every other value on this list, it's stewardship. And almost everything else in this video is, in some sense, a downstream consequence of it. Stewardship is the recognition that wealth is not held for personal use alone, but managed responsibly on behalf of people who haven't been born yet. This is a genuinely different relationship with money than most people have. Most of us, understandably, think of our money as ours, earned, owned, and available to spend as we see fit, within reason. A family operating from a stewardship value thinks of money as something closer to a forest they've been asked to tend. You can absolutely benefit from the forest. You can build a home from its timber, harvest from it, enjoy its shade. What you don't do is clear-cut it for a single season's profit, because the forest was never entirely yours. It belongs equally to whoever inherits it after you. This single value reframes almost every financial decision a family makes. A purchase isn't evaluated only against the question, "Can I afford this?" but against a second, quieter question, "Does this purchase deplete something that was meant to outlast me?" An investment isn't evaluated only for its return, but for whether it builds something durable or simply extracts value for the current generation's benefit. Crucially, stewardship is not the same as hoarding, and it's worth being precise about that distinction, because it's frequently misunderstood. Families operating from genuine stewardship values do enjoy their wealth. They take the vacations. They own the beautiful homes. They live genuinely comfortable lives. What stewardship changes isn't whether they enjoy their wealth, but how they relate to it, with a sense of custodial responsibility rather than pure entitlement. The wealth is enjoyed, but never treated as if it were created entirely by, and therefore owed entirely to, the person currently holding it. 2. Intentional frugality, not deprivation, but alignment. The second hidden value is one of the most misunderstood because it's frequently flattened into a single word that doesn't quite capture what's actually happening. Frugality. Here's the distinction that matters. True old money spending behavior isn't simple deprivation, pinching every penny out of anxiety or scarcity. It's something more precise, which researchers studying modern spending psychology increasingly describe as intentional spending. A deliberate alignment between what a family spends money on and what that family actually values, with everything outside that alignment trimmed away without much emotional difficulty. This produces a spending pattern that looks paradoxical from the outside. A family practicing intentional frugality might spend an extraordinary amount on a child's education, on a piece of land that will remain in the family for a century, or on maintaining a historic home properly, while showing almost no interest in a new car, the latest technology, or a trendy renovation. To an outside observer, this can look inconsistent. How can a family be frugal and also spend that much on education? The answer is that frugality, properly understood, was never about spending less in general. It's about spending only on what genuinely compounds in value, financially, educationally, or in terms of the family's long-term position, and feeling no pull whatsoever towards spending that doesn't. This intentionality has a direct, measurable financial consequence. Resources not spent on depreciating purchases are instead available to be allocated towards savings and investments, capital that then compounds over decades, doing quietly in the background what no single clever investment decision could do as reliably. A family that redirects even a modest percentage of its income away from lifestyle inflation and toward investment, sustained over 30 or 40 years, will often out-accumulate a family with significantly higher income, but no equivalent discipline. This is, in miniature, the entire multi-generational wealth story. Not one brilliant decade, but many ordinary decades of consistent alignment between values and spending. 3. Long-term thinking, the family that plans for grandchildren not yet born. The third hidden value is a relationship with time itself that's genuinely uncommon. The habit of making decisions on a timeline that extends well beyond the decision-maker's own lifetime. This is, in many respects, the value most responsible for the durability of old money fortunes specifically, as opposed to fortunes that are large but short-lived. A family operating with this kind of time horizon treats financial strategy as something inherited and continued, much like a family heirloom passed down with care, never short-sighted, always oriented toward what the position will look like decades, not quarters, into the future. This shows up concretely in how these families structure their actual financial architecture. Rather than relying purely on a single generation's earning power, families operating from this value build durable structures specifically designed to survive the people who created them. Trusts with provisions that extend for decades, charitable foundations designed to operate in perpetuity, land holdings deliberately kept rather than sold, even when a sale might offer an attractive short-term return. Each of these choices sacrifices some immediate flexibility or upside in exchange for durability that benefits people the current decision-makers will, in many cases, never meet. The psychological discipline this requires shouldn't be underestimated. Every financial system in modern life, quarterly earnings reports, annual bonus cycles, daily market price movements, pulls attention toward the short term. A family that consistently resists that pull, generation after generation, is engaging in a genuinely unusual act of patience, repeated thousands of times across thousands of individual decisions, large and small, over the course of a century. Quick pause. If this kind of long-term thinking is resonating with you, drop a comment letting me know which of these values you think is hardest to actually practice in real life. I read every comment, and it shapes what we cover next on this channel. 4. Discretion, protecting wealth by protecting its visibility. We've discussed discretion in previous videos on this channel as a social behavior, the old money instinct to avoid flaunting wealth in conversation or dress. But discretion is worth revisiting here specifically as a value, because understood that way, it reveals something important about why it contributes directly to wealth preservation, not just social comfort. Old money families value discretion, education, philanthropy, good manners, and long-term thinking as an integrated package, and discretion specifically functions as a kind of protective camouflage for the other values on this list. A family that doesn't broadcast its wealth attracts less attention. Fewer opportunistic relationships formed purely for access to money. Fewer extended family members or acquaintances who feel entitled to financial requests. Less pressure, social or otherwise, to spend in order to maintain an external image. This is worth sitting with because it inverts a common modern assumption. Many people assume that visible wealth, the impressive car, the branded possessions, the documented lifestyle, is itself a form of protection, proof of status, of success, of security. Old money's discretion value suggests almost the opposite, that visibility itself is a vulnerability, inviting exactly the kind of attention, expectation, and erosion that a family trying to preserve wealth across generations can least afford. The family that nobody suspects is wealthy is, in a very real sense, a family whose wealth is safer than the family whose wealth is the subject of constant conversation. 5. Financial literacy as a family language, not an individual skill. The fifth hidden value is one that distinguishes families who sustain wealth from families who simply happen to have it for one generation. The deliberate, sustained transmission of financial literacy as something closer to a shared family language than an individual skill held by whichever member happens to be financially inclined. This distinction matters more than it might initially seem. In many families, wealthy or otherwise, one person becomes the de facto financial manager, while everyone else remains largely uninformed about how the family's money actually works. This arrangement can function reasonably well for a single generation, as long as that one knowledgeable person remains active and engaged. It becomes a serious vulnerability the moment that person is no longer available, through death, illness, or simply the natural transition of control, and the next generation discovers they were never actually taught the underlying logic of the family's financial position. Families that successfully sustain wealth across generations treat this differently, sharing knowledge and experience about wealth management, investing, and philanthropy with younger generations, specifically so that competence doesn't rest entirely on any single individual. This shows up in concrete practices, financial decisions discussed openly in family meetings rather than handled privately by one person. Younger family members engage directly in philanthropic decision-making, not just informed of decisions after the fact. Explicit conversations about how the family thinks about risk, debt, and investment, repeated across multiple family members so that knowledge doesn't have a single point of failure. Recent research into how families actually discuss wealth across generations has surfaced an important and somewhat uncomfortable finding here. Younger generations are, on average, considerably more eager for explicit alignment on family values than older generations often assume. Sustained financial literacy as a family practice, then, isn't simply about transmitting technical knowledge. It's about creating the kind of open, recurring conversation that prevents exactly the kind of disconnect this research has identified where each generation quietly assumes a shared understanding that was never actually established out loud. 6. Philanthropy as identity, not obligation. The sixth hidden value reframes something many people assume is purely an external, reputational behavior, philanthropy, as something closer to an internal identity commitment. Families whose names have become synonymous with old money wealth in the popular imagination, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Fords, are remembered not only for the scale of their fortunes, but for the charitable foundations those fortunes eventually funded, continuing to support education, the arts, science, and health, long after the individuals who built the original wealth had died. The instinct behind this wasn't primarily strategic or reputational, though it certainly produced reputational benefits. It stemmed from a genuine awareness of privilege and a strong internalized sense of stewardship, a belief held sincerely rather than performed for an audience, that significant wealth carries with it a responsibility to actively improve the conditions of the world that wealth was generated within. There's a psychological dimension here worth naming directly, because it helps explain why this value persists across generations, rather than fading once the founding generation's personal motivations are gone. Giving appears to provide its own genuine psychological reward, distinct from any external recognition it might also produce. Separately, research using large, nationally representative survey data has found that older adults are consistently more likely to donate and donate larger amounts than younger adults, a pattern that holds even after accounting for differences in wealth, suggesting this isn't simply about older people having more money to give, but about something that develops or deepens with age and experience. For families sustaining wealth across generations, philanthropy functions as something more than charitable generosity. It becomes part of how the family understands its own identity and purpose, answering implicitly the question of what the wealth is actually for, beyond the comfort of the people currently holding it. A family with no answer to that question, generation after generation, tends to drift eventually toward pure consumption. A family with a genuine internalized philanthropic identity has built into its very self-understanding a reason to keep building rather than simply keep spending. If you're finding value in this breakdown, this is exactly the kind of video worth sharing with someone who's thinking seriously about building lasting wealth, not just earning it. Send it to them now and let me know in the comments which value here you think your own family already practices, even without naming it. 7. Quality over quantity, the aesthetic expression of a deeper value. The seventh hidden value is one we've touched on in previous videos as a matter of taste and presentation, but it's worth examining here specifically as a value with direct financial consequence. A consistent preference for quality, value, and longevity over quantity, price, and trend. Old money lifestyle choices consistently reflect this prioritization, favoring experiences over accumulating possessions, favoring genuine value over simply low price, and favoring things built to last over things built to be quickly replaced. This isn't simply an aesthetic preference, though it does produce a recognizable aesthetic. It's a financial philosophy applied to every category of purchasing decision a family makes. The financial logic compounds in a way that's easy to underestimate. A family that buys one excellent, well-made item rather than 5 mediocre, frequently replaced items spends less over a 10-year period than a family chasing trends and constantly replacing depreciating purchases. even if the single high-quality item carried a higher upfront price. This same logic, scaled up, applies to nearly every major purchase a family makes. Housing maintained and improved over decades rather than upgraded every few years purely for novelty. Vehicles kept in excellent condition through careful maintenance rather than replaced on a fixed schedule. Relationships with service providers, advisors, and institutions built over years, specifically because switching costs, both financial and in terms of trust, are real and worth avoiding. The deeper value underneath this preference is the same stewardship and long-term thinking discussed earlier in this video, simply applied at the level of individual purchasing decisions rather than overall financial strategy. Every time a family chooses quality and durability over the cheaper or more fashionable alternative, it is making the same underlying bet it makes with its investment portfolio and its trust structures. That patience and genuine value, compounded consistently over a long enough period, will always outperform whatever looks most appealing in the moment. 8. How these values reinforce each other, the system, not the list. Here's what's important to understand about everything we've covered so far. These 7 values are not 7 independent strategies a family can pick and choose between. They form a single, mutually reinforcing system. And that interdependence is precisely why families who genuinely practice all 7 tend to sustain wealth so much more reliably than families who adopt only 1 or 2 in isolation. Stewardship makes intentional frugality feel natural rather than restrictive, because spending is always measured against the question of what's being preserved for the future, not just what feels good right now. Long-term thinking makes discretion easier to maintain, because a family genuinely focused on multi-generational outcomes has little use for the short-term social validation that visible spending provides. Financial literacy ensures that stewardship and long-term thinking don't depend on a single gifted individual, but are genuinely shared and therefore durable across a family's full membership. Philanthropy gives the entire system a sense of purpose beyond mere accumulation, answering the question of why preserve wealth at all rather than simply how. And the preference for quality over quantity is simply this entire philosophy, expressed in the smallest everyday decisions a family makes. Remove any single value from this system, and the others tend to weaken. A family with strong long-term thinking, but no discretion, will eventually attract exactly the kind of attention and expectation that erodes long-term positioning. A family with strong philanthropy, but no financial literacy passed down to the next generation, will eventually give away resources it doesn't actually understand how to replace. The values work because they work together, which is also precisely why they're so difficult to copy partially, and why families who only adopt the aesthetic markers of old money without the underlying value system tend not to sustain wealth the way families who hold the complete system do. 9. Why these values are rarely taught explicitly and what that means for you. It's worth closing with an honest observation about why these values, despite being genuinely learnable, are so rarely articulated explicitly, even within the families who practice them most consistently. Most of what we've described in this video isn't transmitted through direct instruction. It's transmitted the way language is transmitted to a child, through repeated ambient exposure, absorbed gradually over years, rather than taught in a single lesson. A child who grows up watching a parent quietly repair, rather than replace a worn object, who sits through family conversations about long-term financial decisions, who observes philanthropy treated as a normal, unremarkable part of family life, rather than a special occasion, that child absorbs these values without ever being formally taught them, in much the same way they absorb their native accent. This is precisely why these values are so frequently described across multiple strands of research into wealthy families as hidden, not because anyone is concealing them deliberately, but because they were never packaged as explicit lessons in the first place. They live in the texture of daily life, not in a course syllabus. The genuinely useful implication of this, for anyone watching who didn't grow up inside this kind of environment, is that these values remain entirely learnable as an adult through deliberate practice rather than childhood absorption. You don't need to have grown up around this kind of wealth to adopt a stewardship mindset toward your own resources, however large or modest. You don't need inherited capital to practice intentional frugality, build long-term thinking into your financial decisions, or treat financial literacy as something to share rather than hoard within your own family. The aesthetic markers of old money, the wardrobe, the manners, the vocabulary, are the most visible, most frequently imitated part of this culture. The values are the actual engine underneath all of it, and unlike the aesthetic, they were never exclusive to begin with. Let's bring it together. Stewardship over ownership, intentional frugality over either deprivation or indulgence, long-term thinking that plans for people not yet born, discretion as genuine protection, not just modesty, financial literacy treated as a family language, not an individual skill, philanthropy as identity, not obligation, and quality over quantity in every decision, large and small. None of these require inherited wealth to begin practicing. All of them compound, slowly, almost invisibly, the same way the fortunes they protect compound, over years and decades rather than weeks and months. That's the actual secret, if there is one. Not a hidden investment strategy, not a tax loophole nobody else knows about. A set of values held consistently by enough people in a family for long enough that the compounding effect eventually looks, from the outside, like magic. It isn't magic, it's just consistency, applied for longer than most people have the patience for. If this changed how you think about what actually sustains wealth, subscribe now. We break down the real mechanics behind generational wealth every single week, going far deeper than the surface-level content most channels in this space offer. And if you want to understand the financial architecture these values actually get built into, go watch our video on why old money dynasties use private family offices instead of retail banking. It's the natural next step after this one, and it'll show you exactly how these values translate into real financial structure. Let me know in the comments which of these 7 values you're going to start practicing first. I read every one. I'll see you in the next video.